Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. My name is Matt Knight, and I am the host for today. And I'm here today with Arts and Features editor Jennifer Fumiko Cahill and staff writer Iridian Cazares. And I'm just going to say welcome to both of you and mention that Dave is a little bit under the weather this week, but he'll be back in fine form next week, and I will be your server for today.
Yeah, Dave's off on a day with perfect sunshine. It's not suspicious at all.
It is a little suspicious, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, well, I'll have to look into that. All right, well, thanks for being here, guys. And so let's just, as Dave would say, dive into this edition of North Coast Journal. And Jen, I think you have some information about the cover story. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is our green issue. So every year around this time of year, we do an issue that is, close to Earth Day, of course. And so we try to focus on things regarding our ecosystem, topics like recycling, our oceans, etc. And this year, although honestly, those topics come up all year round. I mean, yeah, we just... They keep coming. It's like the cannabis issue. There's no stopping it. So this year for our green issue, one of the stories we have for the cover is Kim Ware's story about bull kelp. So bull kelp is a kind of seaweed that is vastly important to our ecosystem, as it turns out. She has written previously about the crisis for red abalone, and why you're not getting abalone in restaurants is because they are suffering tremendously, and they have been preyed upon, and they haven't been able to kind of reproduce at the same rate to make it possible for us to eat them. And it's also terrible for the environment. But, also we can't eat them. So anyway, it seems like every time there's a species that is either on the brink of extinction or fighting back from the brink of extinction, whether it's the condors or the abalone, Kim is the one who writes about it. And this time she is conquering bull kelp and the urchins that are preying upon them. And there's a photograph that you have to see that is the little tiny bull kelp just starting to grow happily, and then behind it is the looming urchin that's like this spiky monster. It's terrifying. Anyway, but there's some good news in there, and there's some research possibilities about how we can help the bull kelp come back, which will in turn also help our abalone friends. So it's definitely worth a read. It's a good one.
Mm-hmm. And I was interested in how this intersects with global warming and the effects that it's having on kelp, bull kelp, and kelp in general.
The phenomenon that is referred to in the story is basically an ocean heat wave that came and really changed what they say, stressing the bull kelp forests, was the warm water blob, which, we have enough of these ecological disasters that we cannot come up with a great name for all of them. So this is the warm water blob. And, but yeah, that would
have been like a 60s monster movie, would it?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's warm water, it's the gentler blob. Yeah. But it's definitely, you'll like this. It's the warm water blob and the Godzilla El Nino in 2015. So
yeah, so I mean, life imitates art, right?
Yes, it does,
but not in a good way. Okay, well, good, interesting. So let's move on to Iridian, who has, as we were talking about before we went on the air, is now the maven of all things recycling, and so she's come with her third story in regards to the recycling process here on the North Coast. So, Iridian, why don't you tell us what your story is about?
Yeah, so my story is about where Humboldt County's CRV redemption services is at right now. And so we know that all of our CRV centers have closed down. And in my last story, I talk about why that is. And it's just basically the state's formula for allocating subsidies isn't working for everybody. So now that all of the CRV redemption service sites are closed and not giving deposits back, deposits that we pay when we get like a bottle of soda or a can of soda. So now that responsibility goes to grocery stores. And so grocery stores are now the ones who have to take back those bottles and cans and give that deposit back to the consumer. And so I think my story kind of talks about how that responsibility has become somewhat of a burden for some grocery stores and retailers, and how they now have to take on the responsibility of, handing that deposit that they initially get from customers to CalRecycle, on top of transporting material to recycling centers and also taking on that burden of staffing and storing the material. And I also talk about the fact that nothing is going to change in the bottle bill unless it's at the legislative level. So only the legislature can change the California bottle bill. And so I talk about some bills that are being introduced and how long that's going to take. And so right now it's probably going to take a couple years if those bills actually get passed. And CalRecycle also has to kind of write regulations on those laws and everything. So it's still going to take a while. But yeah, so that's the story that I've got on CRV.
So this is the third story you've written on this particular topic, and I just wonder if you have a take on how this whole thing has become such a dysfunctional mess. Is it circumstances of the value of the recycled materials? Is it lack of industry responsibility, lack of legislative responsibility? I mean, how did we get to this point where it seems like the entire process is broken down?
Yeah, I think all of the above, honestly. And I think it's become this thing where we use plastic all the time, and especially with China's national sword policy and how they stopped taking a bunch of our recyclables and our recycling material because it was contaminated. And when we say contaminated, it's because it's dirty. It's not clean. It still has food in it. And so it's national sword policy. It's the bottle bill, the California's bottle bill specifically, that just is outdated. We've changed the way that we've collected materials and sold them. And so, yeah, it's a lot of stuff, and we just kind of have to modernize it. And a couple of the bills that are introduced kind of reflect Oregon and Michigan's bottle bill, which has which puts more responsibility of making sure that materials get returned into the recycling stream by beverage manufacturers,
right?
Like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and all of them. So
that was going to be a question of mine, which is, where is the industry responsibility in the proposed legislation, or is there any? Or is California making any moves towards making industry responsible for the materials that they're creating?
Yeah, so I believe Senate Bill 38 is the one that has that amendment added into the recycling bottle bill. And according to, I think State Senator Wonkowski, I think that's his name, I'm not sure. He, in his release, he said that Oregon, despite having 1/8 of the population that California has, they are really good at taking on CRV material, and they have a really good system where things actually get returned, where people can actually get their deposits back. And so I think that's definitely part
something
of it
to emulate for California, perhaps.
Yeah,
definitely. Somebody told me a statistic. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that 2/3 of all the plastic ever created in history has been created since 2009.
Yeah, I think
staggering, and the amount that they project out into the future just exponentially goes right off the chart. So this is just a problem that really needs to be dealt with, and it's just kind of frustrating. It seems like it's not really moving as quickly or as urgently as it could be. Is that just a perception, or do you think there are things going on in the background that we just don't see?
Well, I think it's kind of both. I also know that there are areas like in Southern California, in Los Angeles, where CRV recycling is profitable and it's working there, and it's cities and counties and rural areas like us that kind of suffer the most because we have to transport the material, and like the Bay Area, their land is so expensive that it doesn't really, the cost of CRV doesn't kind of pan out. And so, yeah, so I think the legislator wants to solve this problem, but it wants to also like make sure everyone's needs are met. And so I think, yeah, it's just an overall mess.
I see. Well, thank you for that story. Okay, Jennifer, why don't we talk a little bit about what's going on in the arts and features beat?
Well, another green-geared story, and this time from the delightful Linda Stansberry, who I'm sorry can't join us today, because I know she would love to talk about this story if only she were available. So the title of the story is Pigs and Whiskey, which sadly now can't be the name of my country cover band. But she's talking about Alchemy Distillery. Are you aware of Alchemy?
No, but I probably should be.
Yes, you should. So they make all kinds of local liquor down there, including something called Bolt Bourbon and another one called Serial Killer, which, cereal with a C, should give you a hint that they are using lots and lots of grain. And as Linda points out in the story, liquor is about grain. Bourbon is specifically about a lot of corn, but other grains can be added to it. And so when we look at how, liquor is being made locally, Alchemy, with their processes, they've always been trying to be really, really green. For one thing, they've been using recycled bagels, like leftover bagels from Los Bagels. You wonder what happens to those. They don't just get thrown away. Some of them turn into liquor. And yeah, right? You could actually drink your Los Bagels. That could happen. So anyway, Amy Boner, who owns the distillery with her husband, Steve, she has been donating, or they have been donating their spent grain. Like basically, you know how you have to make mash? So when you're in your backyard with your illegal still, I know you have probably leftovers, but all that grain that gets, like you do, all that grain that's left over, you can imagine it's massive amounts of grain that get boiled, have the liquor taken out of them, and then what happens to all this spent grain? Well, the leftover, sometimes still warm, kind of cooked up grain that has a negligible amount of alcohol gets sent off to pig farms, among other places. So Alchemy has been pig cycling their grain for a really long time, since they started basically, I think in, 2015? But then they recently got in touch with a specific farm. The sheriff operates the Fortuna Swap Farm, which is the Sheriff's Work Alternative Program. So let's say you're a low-level offender, you've done some sort of nonviolent petty crime of some kind, and instead of incarceration, you have the option to, in some cases, to work off your time. And you might be splitting firewood that goes to seniors. You might be doing some sort of animal care at a shelter or something like that, cleaning kennels, that kind of thing. Or you could be helping to raise animals on this farm in Fortuna. They could be chickens, they could be pigs, cows, etc. When I was a kid and I had to help my friend with his pigs at his farm, I would have probably chosen incarceration instead. My attitude has changed since. And it's kind of a cool program because you not only leave it without having been incarcerated, which is expensive for the county, sometimes traumatizing for the people who are incarcerated. And, so few things get better when you add incarceration. But also you could leave with a skill. You have now had some work experience that can possibly be helpful. So they can be working with up to anywhere from 20 to 150 pigs. What happens to the pigs? Eventually, the pigs can go to 4-H. They go to the fair. Some of them are sold as pork to the public, but they turn into happy, well-fed pork.
I was going to say, M's good eating.
Them's good eating. And I'm sorry, have you bought like mass-produced supermarket pork anywhere in the last 10 years? It's not good. It doesn't taste like pork.
Right.
You're like, could be chicken, could be pork. That's sad. But wonderful, locally raised pork, fed with tasty, tasty liquor leftovers. Apparently, the pigs also love it. According to the vet that Linda...
What is not to love? I mean...
What is not to love? As I said, the alcohol is negligible.
For you and me, maybe. But.
I know, it would be great, like drunk pigs all over the farm. No, it wouldn't be great. Please don't write letters. I was joking. I'm sorry, and I take it back. But Megan Mott, the veterinarian that Linda talked to, said that it is a high-protein, high-fiber feed source. And the only thing is it's a little bit too rich to make that your whole piggy diet. Keep that in mind in case you're like, 100% over keto and looking for something new. This is not what you want. It's too much. So while the pigs love it, it can only be added to supplement their feed so that they don't have digestive problems. But essentially, it makes it so that this local grain, which I should mention, Alchemy also buys their grain locally, kind of grows here, gets used to make, at least 2 kinds of booze. And then the leftovers, along with those Los bagels, and then the leftovers go to feed these pigs, which, circle of life, feed the people who live here and also can give some people some alternatives to incarceration and maybe some skills to go forward in life with.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like the legislature could take this as a life lesson when they're applying it to CRV.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting, and it sounds like a feel-good story that where things are actually working, and boy, that doesn't happen that often anymore.
Yeah. So when you get yourself, some locally raised bacon, a nice cocktail, you can say, "Look, I'm helping."
Great. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you for that, Jen. And then I noticed that there is you're soliciting for a reader survey.
We are.
About that.
Okay, so it's not that hard a survey. I looked at the questions, and there's nothing like, it's not as shameful as my Netflix queue reminding me of what I recently watched. You know what I mean? So, yeah. But if you take our readers survey, I believe there are prizes. Okay. Some of the people who complete the survey are going to get gift certificates? So you should definitely do it. And most importantly, it helps us shape the paper. So that instead of just clenching your fist and shouting into the void about the journal and what you would rather see or what you would like to see more of, or what you never want to see again, you can just fill out the survey and we will actually look at it and think about your answer.
All right. So you're including input into making the paper better.
Yes. Your personal attacks on me should still just come to my inbox, Jennifer at North Coast Journal. But everything else, let us know what you think about the different columns. We want to know who's reading. We want to do our best to be able to reflect the community's interests and bring up some things that, our readers would like to see.
Great. Well, we have a little bit of time left. And what else are you guys covering? We've got about 5 minutes to talk about it.
Yeah, so I covered a Latino Net board meeting with Humboldt County Health Officer Ian Hoffman, and it was his first public meeting with Latino and Latinx leaders in the community about these disproportionate rates of COVID cases and vaccine rates amongst the county's Latinx population. And so it was a really good conversation, I think, as a viewer. But in my story, I dive deep into what was discussed and kind of deciphering why those disproportions exist. And so, Ian Hoffman did say that he wasn't sure why those gaps exist, if it was because of, vaccine supply, because, Humboldt County has had very low supply on vaccines. So he said that Humboldt County Public Health tried to, or wants to, spread the word that vaccines are available, but he questioned how can they do that when supply is so low. And so he also talked about just the disproportionate rate in positive cases amongst the Latino population. So the Latino or the Latinx population in Humboldt County accounts for about 12% of the population, but their case rates are at 25%, I think, since the last time I looked at the dashboard. And so, they also want to address those, and it was a conversation about how they can do that. And the one message that Hoffman really amplified was that the Joint Information Center is ready and prepared to take on any questions about COVID-19 and the vaccine in Spanish. And so he said that they've had Spanish speakers come on board to be able to help the community. And so,
and I have to know that one of Dr. Hoffman's superpowers is that he is a Spanish speaker.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that he talked about in the meeting, is that he has the ability to speak Spanish. He's bilingual, but that he'll use that skill when needed, but he doesn't know how well it will apply to Humboldt County Public Health, because we don't really have a huge Latino and Latinx population. And so, but he did say that he worked in Oakland at La Clínica de la Raza, which is a very dominant Hispanic and Latinx clinic, and also at like Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco. And he was surrounded by a lot of Latinx communities. And so he really learned about cultural competency and cultural sensitivity in working with those groups, and that he's hoping that can translate into public health, public health and public policies.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, guys, that's just going to about do it for us for this week. North Coast Journal's current edition is on newsstands and online right now. Get out there, get yourself a copy, get a copy for everyone you know, and hand it out. And both Thad and Dave will be back next week, and I will be back lurking in the background.
Filling out your reader survey.
Yeah.
That's right, exactly.
That's right.
Brittany and Jennifer, thanks so much for doing this, and we'll see you again real soon.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.